Sheikh Billionaire ordered her silence. She replied fluently in Arabic, revealing his billion-dollar betrayal. The evening air in Manhattan carried the scent of expensive perfumes and ambition as Emma Carter pushed through the heavy glass doors of the Azure Pearl. Her black uniform was pressed to perfection, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her green eyes carefully avoiding direct contact with anyone who mattered. At 26, she had learned that invisibility was a survival skill in a world where the wealthy dined and the forgotten served. The restaurant glowed with soft, amber lighting, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic shadows across white marble floors. Tables draped in silk cloths hosted conversations worth millions, deals that would never see the light of day, and secrets exchanged over 30-year-old wine. Emma had worked here for 18 months, and in that time she had become a ghost, efficient, silent, forgettable. Tonight felt different. The manager, Gerald, was unusually tense, adjusting his tie repeatedly as he gathered the staff near the kitchen. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. A VIP was arriving. Not just any VIP, Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour, oil magnate, real estate emperor, a man whose net worth was estimated at $8.7 billion, though rumors suggested the real number was much higher. Emma felt her stomach tighten. She had read about men like him during her time at Columbia University, back when she believed education and intelligence could level any playing field. Back when she was naive enough to think merit mattered more than connections. That diploma now sat in a drawer in her tiny studio apartment in Queens, gathering dust alongside dreams she could no longer afford to remember. Gerald's eyes scanned the staff and landed on her. Emma Carter, table 12, a private corner booth with a view of the city skyline. Her heart sank, but she nodded with practiced professionalism. She had served billionaires before. They were all the same, demanding, dismissive, utterly convinced of their own superiority. She would smile, serve, and disappear. That was the job. The doors opened at exactly 8 o'clock. Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour entered like a storm contained in human form. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with dark hair graying at the temples and a perfectly trimmed beard that framed a face carved from authority itself. His eyes were almost black, sharp and calculating, missing nothing. He wore a charcoal gray Brioni suit that probably cost more than Emma earned in a year. And on his wrist, a Patek Philippe watch caught the light, $2.3 million of Swiss precision. Behind him came 4 men. 2 were clearly security, their eyes constantly scanning, hands never far from concealed weapons. The other 2 were advisors, carrying leather portfolios and wearing expressions of practiced deference. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath as the group moved toward table 12. Emma approached with a tray of water glasses, her movements smooth and unobtrusive. She had perfected the art of being present without being noticed. As she placed the glasses on the table, Sheikh Rashid didn't even glance at her. To him she was furniture, a function, not a person. His voice, when he spoke to his companions, was deep and commanding, with only the slightest accent coloring his perfect English. They discussed the acquisition of Tech Vision Solutions, an American technology company specializing in artificial intelligence and data analytics. The conversation was technical, filled with terms like market capitalization, hostile takeover, and strategic positioning. Emma poured water and took their orders, filet mignon rare for the sheikh, various dishes for the others, and retreated to the kitchen. As the evening progressed, Emma served course after course with mechanical precision. The sheikh and his team continued their discussion, occasionally lowering their voices when particularly sensitive topics arose. Emma noticed everything while appearing to notice nothing. It was a skill she had developed out of necessity. In her previous life, attention to detail had been her greatest strength. Now it was simply a way to avoid mistakes that could cost her this job. At 9:15, Sheikh Rashid's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and something shifted in his expression, a flash of irritation quickly masked. He answered in English, his tone clipped and professional. But within seconds his demeanor changed. He stood abruptly, walking toward the window with the phone pressed to his ear. Emma was clearing plates from an adjacent table when he turned and looked directly at her for the first time. His eyes were cold, assessing her as one might assess a potential security risk. He raised one hand in a sharp gesture. Silence, not a word. You understand nothing. His voice carried absolute authority, the kind that expected instant obedience without question. Emma froze, nodded once, and lowered her gaze. She continued clearing the table, moving slowly, carefully, becoming even more invisible than before. Sheikh Rashid turned back to the window and switched languages. Arabic. The words flowed from him with native fluency, his tone shifting from the careful diplomacy of English to something far more candid, more dangerous. Emma's hands continued their work, but her mind sharpened to a razor's edge. She understood every single word. He was speaking to someone named Khalid, discussing the TechVision acquisition in terms that had nothing to do with legitimate business. The Sheikh's voice carried the confidence of a man who believed himself completely secure, speaking a language in a country where he assumed no one around him could possibly understand. He spoke of manipulation, of a carefully orchestrated plan to destroy TechVision's stock value through planted rumors and falsified reports, of shell companies in the Cayman Islands ready to receive transferred funds, of executives who had already been bribed, including a vice president named Marcus Thornton, who would facilitate the fraud from inside the company. $1.2 billion would be siphoned through a network of offshore accounts, leaving American investors holding worthless shares, while Sheikh Rashid acquired the company's valuable AI patents for a fraction of their true worth. The details were specific, damning, and utterly illegal. Dates, account numbers, names, a conspiracy that would destroy thousands of investors and employees while enriching a man who already had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Emma's heart pounded, but her hands remained steady. She finished clearing the table and moved toward the kitchen, her mind racing. Marcus Thornton. The name hit her like a physical blow. She knew that name. She knew it intimately, painfully, in a way that made her stomach turn, and her throat tighten with suppressed rage. Marcus Thornton was the man who had destroyed her life. Sheikh Rashid ended his call and returned to the table, his expression once again composed and unreadable. He gestured for Emma without looking at her, the universal signal for a server to approach. She did, carrying the dessert menu, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "Your check is ready, Sheikh Rashid." She spoke in Arabic, fluent, flawless Arabic, with the formal classical structure and the subtle inflections of the Gulf dialect. Her pronunciation was perfect, her tone respectful but firm, and I believe the investors of TechVision Solutions would also like to know that their accounts are being emptied while you dine. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Sheikh Rashid's head snapped toward her, his eyes widening in genuine shock for perhaps the first time in decades. His advisors froze mid-conversation. The security guards' hands moved instinctively toward their weapons before stopping, confused by the surreal nature of the threat. A waitress speaking Arabic, revealing knowledge of a conversation she should not have understood. The entire restaurant seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. Conversations at nearby tables faltered. Heads turned. The ambient music continued playing, but it felt suddenly hollow, a soundtrack to a moment that had just shattered the carefully maintained illusion of power and control. Sheikh Rashid stood slowly, his considerable height now used as an intimidation tactic. He stared at Emma with an intensity that would have made most people step back, apologize, flee. But Emma had already lost everything once. She had already been destroyed by powerful men who thought themselves untouchable. Fear was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Who are you?" he asked in Arabic, his voice low and dangerous. Emma met his gaze directly for the first time, her green eyes steady and unflinching. "Someone who understands more than you assumed," she replied in the same language. "Someone who knows exactly what you're planning. And someone who will not be silenced with a gesture and an order." The tension stretched between them like a wire pulled to breaking point. Sheikh Rashid's jaw tightened, his mind clearly racing through implications, calculations, threats, and contingencies. He was a man accustomed to controlling every variable, and Emma had just become a variable he had not anticipated, after what felt like an eternity, but was perhaps only 10 seconds. He spoke again, this time in English, his voice carefully modulated for the benefit of anyone listening. "Bring the check. We will discuss your linguistic skills another time." It was a threat wrapped in civility, a promise that this conversation was far from over. Emma nodded once, turned, and walked toward the register with her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Behind her, she heard the sheikh speaking rapidly to his security team in Arabic, ordering them to find out everything about her. Everything. As Emma printed the check with trembling hands, she realized that her life had just changed irrevocably. She had confronted a billionaire with the truth of his crimes. She had made herself visible to a man who preferred his servants invisible. She had become a problem that needed to be solved, and somewhere in the back of her mind, beneath the fear and adrenaline, a small voice whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, she had also found the weapon she needed to finally destroy Marcus Thornton and reclaim everything he had stolen from her. But the cost of wielding that weapon might be higher than she could possibly imagine. The night was far from over, and Emma Carter had just stepped out of the shadows and into a game played by people who made and broke fortunes with a phone call. The question was whether she would survive long enough to see justice done, or whether she had just signed her own destruction. Sheikh Rashid paid the check in cash, leaving a tip that was insultingly small, a deliberate message. As he walked toward the exit, he paused beside Emma, leaning close enough that only she could hear his whispered words in Arabic. "You have made a very dangerous mistake tonight. We will speak again soon, and you will learn that some secrets are protected by more than silence." Then he was gone, his entourage following like shadows, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive cologne and the weight of unspoken threats hanging in the air like smoke. Emma stood alone in the middle of the Azure Pearl, surrounded by oblivious diners and the clinking of silverware on fine china, and wondered if she had just committed an act of courage or an act of suicide. Time would tell, but one thing was certain: the invisible waitress had just become very, very visible. And in the world of billionaires and their secrets, visibility could be the most dangerous thing of all. The following morning arrived with the grey light of a New York November, cold and unforgiving. Emma had barely slept, her mind replaying the confrontation over and over, analyzing every word, every gesture, every possible consequence. She lived in a fifth-floor walk-up in Astoria, Queens, a neighborhood where the American dream still felt achievable if you squinted hard enough and ignored the crumbling infrastructure. Her studio apartment was small but clean, decorated with the remnants of a life she used to live: books on international relations, a framed photo of her mother, and that Columbia University diploma that mocked her every morning. She made coffee in a French press that had been a graduation gift from her mother, back when the future seemed bright and full of possibility. Her mother had died 2 years ago, her final months consumed by medical bills that insurance refused to cover and treatments that ultimately failed. Emma had sold everything of value to pay for those treatments, had taken out loans she would be repaying for the next decade, and had held her mother's hand as she slipped away in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and defeat. It was after her mother's death that Marcus had struck, when she was most vulnerable, most distracted, most unable to defend herself. He had stolen her algorithm, the culmination of 3 years of research and development, and claimed it as his own. When she confronted him, he had looked at her with something close to pity and said the words that still burned in her memory: "Who's going to believe you? You're nobody. I'm a senior manager with connections. This is how the world works, Emma. The strong take from the weak. That's not cruelty. That's nature." She had tried to fight, had gone to HR, to management, to anyone who would listen. But Marcus had prepared his defense carefully. He had documentation with his name on it, testimony from colleagues he had cultivated, and lawyers who made her accusations sound like the desperate delusions of a grieving, unstable woman. Within 3 months, she had been forced to resign. Within 6 months, her reputation in the financial sector was destroyed. No one would hire her. No one would even return her calls, so she had become invisible. A waitress, a ghost, someone who served the powerful and pretended not to hear their secrets. Until last night. Emma's phone buzzed on the small kitchen counter, startling her from her thoughts. Unknown number. She stared at it for a long moment before answering. "Miss Carter." A male voice, accented, professional. "We need to speak. A car will arrive at your building in 30 minutes. Please be ready. Who is this?" Emma demanded, though she already knew. Someone who appreciates linguistic talent. 30 minutes, Miss Carter. I suggest you don't keep him waiting. The line went dead. Emma's first instinct was to run. Pack a bag, leave the city, disappear into the vast anonymity of America. But where would she go? She had no money, no connections, no resources. And more importantly, running would mean abandoning the one chance she might ever have to make Marcus Thornton pay for what he had done. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress and a grey coat, professional but not expensive. She pulled her hair back and applied minimal makeup. If she was going to face Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour again, she would do it on her own terms, with dignity intact. Exactly 30 minutes later, a black Mercedes S-Class pulled up in front of her building. The driver, a man in his 40s with the bearing of ex-military, stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. Emma descended the stairs, her heart pounding but her expression calm, and slid into the leather interior. The drive took 20 minutes, winding through Manhattan traffic toward the Upper East Side. They stopped in front of the Carlyle, one of the city's most exclusive hotels, where rooms started at $2,000 per night, and discretion was the primary commodity. The driver opened her door, gestured toward the entrance, and said simply, "Penthouse." "You're expected." The elevator ride to the top floor felt like ascending into another world. When the doors opened, a woman in an impeccable suit greeted her with a professional smile and led her down a hallway decorated with original artwork worth more than Emma's entire building. They stopped at a set of double doors. The woman knocked once, then opened them and stepped aside. The penthouse suite was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Central Park and the Manhattan skyline. The furnishings were modern and expensive, all clean lines and muted colors. And standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, was Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour. He turned as Emma entered, his expression unreadable. He wore dark slacks and a white dress shirt, no tie, the top button undone, a calculated casualness that somehow made him seem more dangerous, not less. His dark eyes studied her with the same intensity as the night before. But now there was something else in his gaze, curiosity, perhaps even a hint of respect. "Miss Emma Carter," he said in English, his accent more pronounced in the quiet of the suite. "Columbia University, graduated summa cum laude with a degree in international relations. 2 years in Cairo as part of a study abroad program, where you became fluent in Arabic, French, and conversational Farsi. Returned to New York and took a position as a junior analyst at Meridian Capital, where you developed a proprietary algorithm for predicting market movements in emerging economies, an algorithm that was subsequently stolen by your supervisor, Marcus Thornton, who registered the patent under his own name and used it to secure a position as vice president at Tech Vision Solutions." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You attempted to fight the theft through legal channels, but were outmaneuvered by expensive lawyers and corporate politics. Your mother died of cancer while you were engaged in this battle, leaving you with substantial medical debt. You were forced to resign from Meridian Capital under pressure, and your reputation in the financial sector was systematically destroyed. For the past 18 months, you have worked as a waitress at the Azure Pearl, living in a studio apartment in Queens, and existing in a state of what I believe Americans call barely getting by." Emma felt exposed, violated, as if he had reached into her chest and pulled out her heart to examine it. But she kept her voice steady. "You have good investigators. The best," Sheikh Rashid confirmed. He moved away from the window, approaching her with measured steps. "But what my investigators could not tell me is why a woman with your intelligence, your education, and your skills would risk everything by confronting a man like me. You knew I could destroy you with a phone call. You knew I could make you disappear. Yet you spoke. Why?" Emma met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. "Because I'm tired of powerful men thinking they can do whatever they want without consequences. Because I've already lost everything, so I have nothing left to fear. And because Marcus Thornton is part of your scheme, which means you might be the key to finally making him pay for what he did to me." Sheikh Rashid's eyebrows rose slightly. "Ah, so this is not about justice in the abstract. This is about revenge." "This is about truth," Emma corrected. "And yes, revenge. I won't apologize for that." A ghost of a smile touched the Sheikh's lips. Good. I have no patience for people who pretend their motives are purely noble. Revenge is honest. Revenge is human. He gestured toward a seating area with leather chairs and a glass coffee table. Sit. We have much to discuss. Emma hesitated, then moved to one of the chairs. Sheikh Rashid took the one opposite. His posture relaxed, but his attention focused entirely on her. You have placed me in a difficult position, Miss Carter. You know details of a business arrangement that could, if revealed, cause me significant legal and financial complications. The logical solution would be to ensure your silence through intimidation, bribery, or elimination. Emma's blood ran cold, but she forced herself not to react. However, the Sheikh continued, I did not become a billionaire by ignoring opportunities when they present themselves. And you, Miss Carter, represent a very interesting opportunity. He leaned forward slightly. I have been investigating Marcus Thornton as part of my due diligence on Tech Vision Solutions. What I discovered is that your former supervisor is not merely a thief of intellectual property. He is also embezzling funds from Tech Vision, manipulating financial reports, and inflating stock values to maximize his own compensation before the company's inevitable collapse. In short, he is a criminal who has simply not yet been caught. Emma's heart began to race. Where is this going? Sheikh Rashid smiled, and it was not a kind expression. I propose an alliance, Miss Carter. You want Marcus Thornton destroyed. I want to acquire Tech Vision Solutions without the complications of fraud charges that might eventually trace back to my organization. We can help each other. How? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You will work with me to expose Marcus Thornton's crimes in a way that destroys his credibility and removes him from Tech Vision before my acquisition proceeds. In exchange, I will provide you with the resources, legal support, and evidence necessary to reclaim your stolen algorithm and restore your reputation in the financial sector. I will also ensure that Marcus faces criminal prosecution for his embezzlement and fraud. Emma stared at him, her mind racing through the implications. You want me to help you commit fraud by exposing someone else's fraud? I want you to help me avoid fraud by removing a criminal from a company I intend to acquire legitimately. Sheikh Rashid corrected smoothly. Once Marcus is gone and his manipulations are revealed, Tech Vision's true value will be apparent, and I will make a fair offer to purchase the company. No shell companies, no offshore accounts, no manipulation, just business. And I'm supposed to believe you'll suddenly become ethical, Emma challenged. The Sheikh's expression hardened. You are supposed to believe that I am pragmatic. Your exposure of my conversation last night made me realize that my original plan carried unacceptable risks. If a waitress could understand my Arabic and threaten my entire operation, then I have been careless. Carelessness leads to prison, Miss Carter. I have no intention of going to prison. So yes, I will conduct this acquisition legitimately, because you have made the alternative too dangerous. He stood, moving back to the window. But make no mistake. This is not altruism. This is self-interest. You get your revenge. I get my company. We both get what we want. That is the only morality that matters in this world. Mutual benefit. Emma sat in silence, weighing her options. She could refuse, walk away, try to expose both Sheikh Rashid and Marcus Thornton to the authorities. But she had no evidence, no credibility, no resources. She would be ignored or worse, or she could accept this devil's bargain, use the Sheikh's power and resources to destroy the man who had destroyed her, and finally reclaim her life. It wasn't a choice between good and evil. It was a choice between powerlessness and power, between remaining invisible or becoming visible, between accepting defeat or fighting back with the only weapon available to her. What exactly would you need me to do? She asked finally. Sheikh Rashid turned from the window and his smile was sharp as a blade. Everything, Miss Carter. I need you to become someone Marcus Thornton cannot ignore. Someone who can get close to him, gain his confidence, and extract the evidence of his crimes. I need you to stop being invisible and become the most visible person in his world. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. You want me to seduce him? I want you to remind him of what he stole, the Sheikh said quietly. I want you to make him arrogant, careless, and confident. Men like Marcus Thornton are most vulnerable when they believe they have won. Your job is to make him believe he has won again, right before we destroy him completely. Emma closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. When she opened them again, Sheikh Rashid was watching her with an expression that might have been understanding, or might have been calculation. With a man like him, it was impossible to tell the difference. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "But I have conditions. Name them. When this is over, I want my algorithm back. I want my name on the patent. I want Marcus Thornton in prison. And I want a written guarantee that you will not pursue any fraudulent acquisition of TechVision or any other American company." Sheikh Rashid considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly, agreed with one addition. "When this is over, you will work for me as a consultant on international business development. Your skills are wasted serving tables, Miss Carter. I can offer you a salary of $500,000 per year, plus bonuses. You will help me navigate American business culture and ensure my future acquisitions are conducted with complete legitimacy." Emma stared at him, stunned. "That's not a condition. That's a job offer. Consider it insurance," the Sheikh replied. "If you work for me, you have a vested interest in my success and my adherence to legal practices, and I have a vested interest in your continued discretion and loyalty." "It is, as I said, mutual benefit." Emma stood, her legs unsteady but her resolve hardening like steel. "Then we have an agreement." Sheikh Rashid extended his hand. Emma took it, and they shook. A waitress from Queens and a billionaire from the Emirates, bound together by revenge, pragmatism, and the shared understanding that in a world built on power, the only way to survive was to seize it with both hands and never let go. The game had begun, and Emma Carter was no longer invisible. The transformation began immediately. Sheikh Rashid's team moved with the efficiency of a military operation, and Emma found herself swept into a world she had only observed from the outside. Within 24 hours, she had been moved from her studio apartment in Queens to a furnished two-bedroom in a luxury building in Tribeca. The rent alone was more than she had earned in 6 months at the Azure Pearl. A stylist arrived with racks of clothing, designer dresses, tailored suits, shoes that cost more than her monthly salary. A hairstylist reshaped her simple style into something elegant and sophisticated. A makeup artist taught her techniques she had never considered. But this wasn't a makeover in the shallow sense. This was armor. This was the construction of a persona that could move through Marcus Thornton's world without raising suspicion. Sheikh Rashid's chief of staff, a woman named Layla Hassan, who spoke 5 languages and had degrees from Oxford and the Sorbonne, became Emma's handler and mentor. Layla was in her early 40s, impeccably dressed, and possessed the kind of quiet competence that made her simultaneously invisible and indispensable. "You are not becoming someone else," Layla explained as they sat in the Tribeca apartment reviewing strategy. "You are becoming the version of yourself that Marcus Thornton destroyed. The successful analyst, the confident professional, the woman who should have had the career he stole. This is not deception, Emma. This is reclamation." Emma absorbed the training with the same intensity she had once applied to her studies. Layla taught her how to navigate high society events, how to read power dynamics in a room, how to extract information through conversation without appearing to interrogate. She learned which wines to order, which restaurants were currently favored by Manhattan's elite, which cultural references would mark her as an insider rather than an outsider. But the most important training was psychological. Layla brought in a consultant, a former FBI profiler named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in understanding and manipulating narcissistic personalities. Marcus Thornton is a classic narcissist, Dr. Chen explained during one of their sessions. He believes he is superior to everyone around him, and he requires constant validation of that superiority. He stole your work not just for financial gain, but because he genuinely believes he deserved it more than you did. In his mind, he didn't steal. He simply took what was rightfully his. So how do I use that? Emma asked. You make him feel superior, Dr. Chen said simply. You approach him not with anger or accusation, but with admiration. You tell him you've realized he was right all along, that you were naive and he was simply teaching you how the world works. Narcissists cannot resist someone who validates their worldview. He will want to prove to you again and again how much smarter and more successful he is, and in doing so he will reveal everything. Emma felt sick at the thought of praising Marcus, of pretending to admire the man who had destroyed her. But she understood the strategy. Pride comes before the fall, and Marcus Thornton's pride would be his undoing. While Emma trained, Sheikh Rashid's investigators worked in parallel, building a comprehensive dossier on Marcus Thornton's activities at Tech Vision Solutions. What they discovered was even worse than Emma had imagined. Marcus had not only stolen her algorithm, he had used it to manipulate Tech Vision's investment strategies, steering the company toward high-risk ventures that would eventually fail but would generate massive, short-term profits that he could pocket through stock options and bonuses. He had also created a network of shell companies that contracted with Tech Vision for consulting services that were never actually performed. Millions of dollars were flowing out of Tech Vision and into accounts controlled by Marcus and his associates. The company was being hollowed out from the inside, and when it eventually collapsed, thousands of employees would lose their jobs and investors would lose their savings. Marcus would walk away wealthy and untouchable, just as he had walked away from destroying Emma. The evidence was damning, but it was also complex and difficult to prove without insider access. That's where Emma came in. She needed to get close enough to Marcus to obtain direct evidence, emails, financial records, recorded conversations that could be used in criminal prosecution. The opportunity came 3 weeks into Emma's transformation. Tech Vision Solutions was hosting a charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a black-tie event designed to showcase the company's commitment to arts and education while allowing executives to network with potential investors. Marcus would be there, playing the role of successful vice president and philanthropist. Emma would be there too, but not as a waitress. She would attend as a guest, introduced by one of Sheikh Rashid's business associates as a consultant specializing in emerging markets. Her new identity was carefully constructed, real enough to withstand basic scrutiny, but vague enough to avoid detailed questions. The night of the gala, Emma stood in front of the mirror in her Tribeca apartment and barely recognized herself. The woman looking back wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her figure elegantly, her hair styled in soft waves, her makeup subtle but transformative. She looked like someone who belonged in that world, someone who had never served tables or struggled to pay rent, someone who had never been destroyed and rebuilt from nothing. Layla appeared in the doorway, nodding with approval. Perfect. Remember, you are confident but not aggressive, friendly but not desperate. You are successful in your own right, and you are simply reconnecting with an old colleague. Nothing more. Emma took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. I'm ready. The Metropolitan Museum at night was magical, the ancient artifacts and priceless artwork illuminated by soft lighting that made everything seem to glow from within. The gala was held in the Temple of Dender, the massive Egyptian structure that had been relocated to New York and now served as a dramatic backdrop for Manhattan's elite to congratulate themselves on their generosity. Emma entered on the arm of Richard Castellano, one of Sheikh Rashid's American business partners, a real estate developer who owed the Sheikh several favors and had agreed to serve as Emma's escort for the evening. Richard was in his 50s, charming in a practiced way, and understood that his role was simply to provide legitimacy and then disappear. The room was filled with people Emma recognized from her previous life, executives, investors, socialites who treated charity galas as competitive sport. And there, near the bar, holding court with a group of admirers, was Marcus Thornton. He looked exactly as Emma remembered, perhaps a bit more polished, tall, conventionally handsome, with dark hair styled with expensive product and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore a tuxedo that fit perfectly, and on his arm was a woman Emma didn't recognize. Blonde, young, wearing diamonds that caught the light with every movement. His fiancée, Emma assumed. The latest accessory in Marcus Thornton's carefully curated life. Emma's hands trembled slightly, and she clasped them together to hide the reaction. Richard noticed and leaned close. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We can leave right now." But Emma shook her head. "No, I need to do this." She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The irony was not lost on her, and began to circulate through the room, allowing herself to be introduced to various guests, making small talk about art and philanthropy and the weather. She was patient, waiting for the right moment, the right approach. It came an hour into the event. Marcus had separated from his fiancée, who was engaged in conversation with a group of women near the reflecting pool. He stood alone for a moment, checking his phone, and Emma saw her opportunity. She approached from the side, her path seemingly casual, and then stopped as if surprised. Marcus Thornton. He looked up, his expression shifting from mild annoyance at being interrupted to confusion as he tried to place her face. Emma saw the moment recognition dawned, followed immediately by shock, and then a flash of something that might have been guilt before his features settled into practiced charm. Emma Carter? He said her name as if it were a pleasant surprise rather than a ghost from his past. Wow, I almost didn't recognize you. You look amazing, thank you, Emma said with a smile that felt like swallowing glass. It's been a while, it has, Marcus agreed, his eyes scanning her appearance, clearly trying to reconcile the woman before him with the broken, defeated person he had last seen. What are you doing here? I mean, are you working with the museum, or... He trailed off, and Emma understood the subtext. He was asking if she was staff. If she was still beneath him. Actually, I'm consulting for Castellano development, Emma said smoothly. Emerging markets analysis. Richard invited me as his guest. She saw Marcus's expression shift again, this time to something like respect mixed with confusion. Consulting? That's great. Really great. I'm glad you landed on your feet. The condescension in his tone was subtle but unmistakable. He was glad she had landed on her feet, as if she were a pet that had survived being abandoned. Emma took a sip of champagne, maintaining her composure. I have to admit, Marcus, I owe you an apology. His eyebrows rose. An apology? For what? For how I reacted when you took credit for the algorithm, Emma said, the words tasting like poison. I was young and naive. I didn't understand how the business world actually works. You tried to teach me, and I fought you instead of learning from you. I've had a lot of time to think about it, and I realize now that you were right. The strong take from the weak. That's not cruelty. That's nature. She was quoting his own words back to him, and she saw the moment they registered. Marcus's smile widened and his posture relaxed. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. Validation, submission, proof that he had been right all along. Emma, I appreciate you saying that, he said, his tone now warm and magnanimous. A lot of people never learn that lesson. The fact that you did shows real growth. Real maturity. He glanced toward his fiancée, then back to Emma, and she could see the calculation in his eyes. He was deciding whether she was worth his time, whether there was any advantage to continuing this conversation. You know, we should catch up properly, he said finally. Have lunch sometime. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing with Castellano. And honestly, TechVision is always looking for talented consultants. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to work together again. Emma's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral, even pleased. I'd like that. I really would. They exchanged contact information, Marcus entering her new number into his phone with the casual confidence of someone who believed he was doing her a favor. As he walked away to rejoin his fiancée, Emma stood alone in the shadow of the Temple of Dendur and allowed herself one moment of pure, unadulterated rage. Then she smoothed her expression, finished her champagne, and went to find Richard. The first move had been made. Marcus had taken the bait. Now came the hard part, reeling him in without letting him realize he was the one being caught. As she left the gala that night, Emma caught sight of her reflection in one of the museum's glass cases. The woman looking back was elegant, composed, successful. But beneath the surface, behind the careful makeup and expensive dress, was someone Marcus Thornton had underestimated catastrophically. He had destroyed her once, believing she would stay destroyed. He had stolen from her, believing she would never fight back. He had dismissed her, believing she was nobody. He was about to learn that nobody could be the most dangerous person of all, because nobody had nothing left to lose. And nothing left to lose meant everything to gain. The game was in motion, and this time, Emma Carter was playing to win. The lunch meeting with Marcus took place 2 weeks later at Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most prestigious restaurants. The kind of place where reservations required weeks of advance notice and meals cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Marcus had suggested it, of course, as a demonstration of his status and success. Emma had agreed with apparent gratitude, playing her role perfectly. She arrived exactly on time, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that Layla had selected, professional, expensive, but not trying too hard. Marcus was already seated at a prime table near the window, and he stood as she approached, greeting her with a smile that was all charm and calculation. The meal proceeded with careful choreography. Marcus dominated the conversation, as Emma had known he would, talking about his success at TechVision, the major deals he was closing, the respect he commanded in the industry. Emma listened with apparent fascination, asking questions that allowed him to elaborate, to boast, to reveal details about the company's operations and his own role in them. "You know, Emma," Marcus said as they finished their appetizers, "I've been thinking about what you said at the gala, about understanding how the business world really works. That kind of pragmatism is rare. Most people cling to naive idealism their entire lives. I learned from the best," Emma said, "the lie smooth as silk. You showed me that success requires making hard choices, doing what's necessary, even when others might not understand." Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest in a way that was entirely calculated. "That's exactly right, and honestly, I think you could be very valuable to TechVision. We're expanding our emerging markets division, and we need someone who understands the complexities of international finance and can think strategically." He paused, letting the offer hang in the air. "I could bring you in as a senior consultant. 6-month contract to start, with the possibility of a permanent position if things work out. The pay would be substantial, and you'd be working directly with me, which means you'd have access to the highest levels of decision-making." Emma's pulse quickened. This was even better than she had hoped. Direct access to TechVision's systems, to Marcus's operations, to the evidence she needed. But she couldn't appear too eager. "That's an incredible offer, Marcus. But I have to ask, wouldn't it be awkward, given our history?" Marcus waved a hand dismissively. "That's ancient history. We're both professionals. We've both moved on. Besides," he added with a smile that was meant to be self-deprecating but came across as smug, "I think we both know that what happened back then was ultimately for the best. You've found your path. I've found mine. Now we can work together as equals." The word was absurd and they both knew it. But Emma smiled and nodded as if she believed it. "Then I accept." "Thank you, Marcus. This means a lot." They shook hands across the table, and Emma felt the same revulsion she had felt at the gala, the same need to wash away the contamination of his touch. But she maintained her composure, her smile, her performance. Over the next hour, Marcus outlined the role he envisioned for her, the projects she would work on, the access she would have. He was giving her everything she needed, gift-wrapped and delivered with a bow, because his narcissism made it impossible for him to see her as a threat. In his mind, she had admitted defeat, had acknowledged his superiority, and was now grateful for the opportunity to bask in his success. As they left the restaurant, Marcus's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "I need to take this," he said. "I'll have my assistant send over the contract details." "Welcome to TechVision, Emma." He walked away, phone pressed to his ear, and Emma stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon sunlight, feeling the weight of what she had just done. She had accepted a position working for the man who had destroyed her. She had smiled and thanked him for the privilege. She had played the role of grateful subordinate to perfection. And now she was inside. Now she had access. Now the real work could begin. That evening, Emma met with Sheikh Rashid and Layla in the penthouse suite at the Carlyle. She reported every detail of the lunch, every word Marcus had said, every nuance of his behavior. The Sheikh listened with his characteristic intensity, his dark eyes missing nothing. "He is even more arrogant than I anticipated," Sheikh Rashid observed. "That works in our favor. Arrogant men make mistakes." Layla pulled up a series of documents on her laptop. "We've been monitoring Marcus's communications. He's been in contact with several offshore accounts, and there are large transfers scheduled for the end of this quarter. If we can access his internal emails and financial records at TechVision, we can trace the entire network of his embezzlement." "That's where I come in," Emma said. "Once I start at TechVision, I'll have access to the company's systems. I can copy files, forward emails, document everything. Be careful," the Sheikh warned. "Marcus may be arrogant, but he is not stupid." If he suspects you are investigating him, he will move to protect himself. And he has already destroyed you once. He will not hesitate to do so again. I know, Emma said quietly. But I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. He destroyed someone who believed in justice and fairness. I don't believe in those things anymore. I believe in evidence and leverage and making sure that when I strike, it's fatal. Sheikh Rashid smiled, and it was a cold expression. Good. Then we understand each other. Over the following weeks, Emma integrated herself into Tech Vision Solutions. Her official role was senior consultant for emerging markets, but her real role was investigator, spy, and collector of evidence. She worked from an office on the same floor as Marcus, attended meetings where strategic decisions were made, and gradually gained access to the company's internal systems. Marcus, true to form, treated her with a combination of condescension and pride, like a mentor showing off a reformed student. He introduced her to other executives, praised her work in ways that subtly emphasized his own role in her success, and occasionally invited her to lunch or after-work drinks, where he would hold forth on his business philosophy and his vision for Tech Vision's future. Emma played her role flawlessly, but the strain was immense. Every smile felt like a betrayal of herself. Every word of praise for Marcus felt like swallowing acid. She went home to her Tribeca apartment each night and stood in the shower until the water ran cold, trying to wash away the feeling of contamination. But she was also gathering evidence. Emails that showed Marcus directing funds to shell companies, financial reports that had been altered to hide losses, communications with offshore accounts, contracts for consulting services that were never performed. The algorithm, her algorithm with Marcus's name on the patent, but her original code still visible in the underlying architecture. She copied everything to encrypted drives that she delivered to Layla. During their weekly meetings, Sheikh Rashid's legal team analyzed each piece of evidence, building a case that would be airtight and devastating. But they needed more. They needed something that would not only prove Marcus's crimes, but would also be dramatic enough to capture public attention and ensure that he faced real consequences. They needed a smoking gun. The opportunity came 2 months into Emma's tenure at Tech Vision. Marcus invited her to a private meeting in his office, closing the door and lowering his voice in a way that suggested conspiracy. "Emma, I want to bring you in on something big," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "We're about to close a deal that will transform Tech Vision's position in the market. But it requires absolute discretion." He pulled up a presentation on his computer, and Emma leaned in to look. What she saw made her blood run cold. It was a proposal for Tech Vision to acquire a smaller competitor, a startup called Nexus Analytics that had developed cutting-edge AI technology. But the acquisition was structured in a way that was clearly fraudulent. Tech Vision would purchase Nexus using inflated stock values. Then Marcus and several other executives would short-sell Tech Vision stock before the fraud was revealed, making millions while ordinary investors lost everything. "This is brilliant," Marcus said, his voice filled with pride. "We acquire Nexus, strip out the valuable tech, then let Tech Vision take the hit when the SEC investigates. By the time anyone figures out what happened, we'll have moved the profits offshore and resigned with golden parachutes. It's the perfect play." Emma stared at the screen, her mind racing. This was it. This was the smoking gun. Marcus was not only confessing to past crimes, but inviting her to participate in a new one. She forced herself to smile. "Marcus, this is incredible. But isn't it risky? What if someone finds out?" Marcus laughed, a sound filled with contempt for anyone who might oppose him. "Who's going to find out? The board is in my pocket. The auditors see what I tell them to see. And the SEC is so understaffed and incompetent that by the time they investigate, we'll be long gone. This is how the game is played, Emma. This is how fortunes are made." Emma nodded slowly, as if absorbing wisdom. "I understand. Thank you for trusting me with this." "You've earned it," Marcus said, clapping her on the shoulder. "You've proven you're not one of those naive idealists anymore. You're a realist. You understand that the world belongs to people who are willing to take what they want." As Emma left his office, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The rage that had burned in her chest for 3 years was still there, but it was now focused, refined, sharpened to a single point. Marcus had just handed her everything she needed to destroy him. He had done it willingly, eagerly, because his arrogance made it impossible for him to imagine that she could be a threat. That night, she met with Sheikh Rashid and Layla and presented the evidence. The Sheikh's expression was grim as he reviewed the documents. "This is more than enough," he said quietly. "With this, we can ensure Marcus Thornton faces criminal prosecution for securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He will go to prison." Emma felt a surge of satisfaction, but Layla raised a cautionary hand. "We need to be strategic about how we reveal this," she said. "If we simply turn the evidence over to the SEC, it could take years to prosecute, and Marcus might find a way to escape or negotiate a plea deal. We need to expose him publicly, dramatically, in a way that makes it impossible for him to hide or deflect." Sheikh Rashid nodded slowly. "A public confrontation, at a moment when he believes himself triumphant. When his guard is down and his arrogance is at its peak." Emma's mind was already working through the possibilities. Tech Vision is hosting an investor conference next month. Marcus is scheduled to give the keynote address, presenting the company's future strategy. It will be attended by major investors, financial press, and industry analysts. "If we expose him there, perfect," the Sheikh said. "We will coordinate with the SEC and the FBI to have agents present. We will prepare a presentation that reveals every detail of his crimes. And you, Miss Carter, will be the one to deliver it." Emma felt her heart begin to race. "Me? Who better?" Sheikh Rashid asked. "You are the victim he destroyed. You are the evidence of his crimes. And you are the proof that he underestimated the wrong person. This is your moment, Emma, your justice. Take it." Emma looked at Layla, who nodded encouragingly, then back at the Sheikh. She thought about her mother, who had died believing her daughter's career had been destroyed by her own inadequacy. She thought about the 3 years of invisibility, of serving tables and pretending not to exist. She thought about every moment of humiliation, every night of despair, every time she had looked at her Columbia diploma and wondered if any of it had mattered. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "I'll destroy him," the Sheikh smiled. "Then let us begin planning. We have 1 month to prepare. And when we are finished, Marcus Thornton will wish he had never heard your name." The pieces were in motion. The trap was set. And Emma Carter, the invisible waitress who had been dismissed and destroyed, was about to become the most visible person in Marcus Thornton's world right before she ended it completely. The month leading up to the Tech Vision Investor Conference was a blur of preparation, strategy sessions, and careful coordination with federal authorities. Sheikh Rashid's legal team worked with the SEC and FBI to ensure that the evidence Emma had gathered would be admissible in court, and that agents would be present at the conference to arrest Marcus. Immediately after his exposure, Emma worked with a presentation specialist to create a devastating visual narrative of Marcus's crimes, timelines showing the theft of her algorithm, financial charts documenting the embezzlement, email screenshots proving conspiracy, and recordings of Marcus's own words describing his fraudulent schemes. Every piece of evidence was verified, cross-referenced, and prepared for maximum impact. But the most important preparation was psychological. Dr. Sarah Chen worked with Emma daily, helping her process the trauma of the past 3 years and prepare for the emotional intensity of the public confrontation. "This will be cathartic, but it will also be painful," Dr. Chen warned. "You will be reliving your worst moments in front of hundreds of people. You need to be ready for that." Emma practiced her presentation dozens of times, refining her delivery until every word carried weight, every pause created impact. She practiced maintaining composure when discussing her mother's death, practiced channeling rage into clarity when describing Marcus's betrayal, practiced projecting authority and credibility when presenting technical evidence. Layla coached her on handling potential disruptions if Marcus tried to interrupt, if his lawyers attempted to shut down the presentation, if security tried to remove her from the stage. They prepared contingencies for every scenario, ensuring that no matter what happened, the truth would be revealed. Sheikh Rashid, meanwhile, worked behind the scenes to ensure that the right people would be in attendance. He personally contacted major investors in Tech Vision, financial journalists from the Wall Street Journal and Financial Times, and industry analysts whose opinions shaped market perceptions. He framed the conference as a major announcement about Tech Vision's future, ensuring maximum attendance and attention. The night before the conference, Emma stood in her Tribeca apartment and looked at the woman in the mirror. She wore a navy blue suit that projected authority and professionalism. Her hair was styled simply, her makeup minimal. She looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, someone who commanded respect, someone who could not be dismissed or ignored. But beneath the surface, she was terrified. Not of Marcus, not of public speaking, but of the finality of what she was about to do. Once she stepped onto that stage and revealed the truth, there would be no going back. Her life would change irrevocably. She would no longer be invisible, no longer be safe in anonymity. She would be visible, exposed, vulnerable. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sheikh Rashid. "Tomorrow you reclaim your life. Be strong, be fearless, be victorious." Emma took a deep breath, set down her phone, and went to bed. She did not sleep. The TechVision Investor Conference was held at the Javits Center, a massive convention facility on Manhattan's West Side. The main hall had been transformed into a professional conference space with rows of seats facing a large stage, multiple screens for presentations, and sophisticated audio-visual equipment. By 9 in the morning, the hall was filled with over 500 attendees, investors, analysts, journalists, and TechVision employees. Emma arrived early, entering through a side entrance with credentials that identified her as a TechVision consultant. She made her way to a small room backstage where Sheikh Rashid, Layla, and the legal team were waiting. Also present were 2 FBI agents and an SEC investigator, all in plain clothes, ready to make arrests once the evidence was presented. The plan was simple. Marcus would give his keynote address, presenting TechVision's future strategy and the Nexus Analytics acquisition. Immediately after he finished, Emma would take the stage, ostensibly to present additional analysis on emerging markets. But instead, she would reveal the truth about Marcus's crimes. The FBI would arrest him before he could leave the building. At 10 o'clock, the conference began. Emma watched from backstage as TechVision's CEO gave opening remarks, praising the company's growth and introducing Marcus as a visionary leader who had transformed their strategic position. The audience applauded politely, and Marcus took the stage with the confident stride of someone who believed himself untouchable. His presentation was polished and persuasive, filled with impressive graphics and optimistic projections. He described the Nexus Analytics acquisition as a game-changing move that would position TechVision as a leader in AI technology. He spoke about innovation, disruption, and the future of the industry. He was charismatic, articulate, and utterly convincing. Emma watched him and felt a cold fury settle over her. He was lying to every person in that room, preparing to steal their money and destroy their investments, and he was doing it with a smile and a PowerPoint presentation. When Marcus finished, the audience applauded enthusiastically. He basked in the attention for a moment, then gestured toward the side of the stage. "And now, I'd like to introduce one of our newest consultants who will provide additional insights on our emerging market strategy. Please welcome Emma Carter." Emma walked onto the stage, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. She reached the podium and looked out at the audience. Hundreds of faces, some curious, some bored, some checking their phones. Marcus stood to the side, smiling with proprietary pride, as if she were his creation. She connected her laptop to the presentation system, and the screens behind her lit up with the title slide, "The Truth About TechVision Solutions, a Case Study in Corporate Fraud." The audience stirred, confused. Marcus's smile faltered. Emma took a breath and began to speak. "Good morning. My name is Emma Carter, and I am not here to discuss emerging market strategy. I am here to reveal the truth about TechVision Solutions and the criminal enterprise being run by your Vice President, Marcus Thornton." The room erupted in confused murmurs. Marcus stepped forward, his expression shifting from confusion to anger. "What the hell is this? Emma, what are you doing?" Emma ignored him, advancing to the next slide, which showed her Columbia University diploma and her employment record at Meridian Capital. 3 years ago, I was a junior analyst at Meridian Capital, where I developed a proprietary algorithm for predicting market movements in emerging economies. This algorithm was revolutionary, potentially worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Marcus Thornton, my supervisor at the time, stole this algorithm, registered the patent under his own name, and used it to secure his position here at TechVision. The next slide showed side-by-side comparisons of her original code and the algorithm Marcus had patented. The similarities were undeniable. When I attempted to report the theft, Marcus used his connections and expensive lawyers to destroy my reputation and force me out of the industry. He believed I would disappear, that I would remain silent, that I would never be able to fight back. Marcus was now moving toward the stage, his face red with rage. "Security, get her off the stage! This is insane." But Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. But theft was only the beginning of Marcus Thornton's crimes. Over the past 2 years, he has embezzled over $15 million from TechVision through a network of shell companies and fraudulent consulting contracts. The screens filled with financial records, bank transfers and email evidence. The audience was now completely silent, riveted by the unfolding drama. He has manipulated financial reports to inflate stock values, allowing him to profit from stock options while deceiving investors about the company's true financial health. And most recently, he has planned a fraudulent acquisition of Nexus Analytics designed to strip assets from TechVision while he and his co-conspirators profit from short selling the company's stock before the fraud is revealed. The final slides showed Marcus's own emails and recorded conversations describing the scheme in detail. His voice, captured during their private meeting, filled the hall. "This is how the game is played, Emma. This is how fortunes are made." The effect was devastating. The audience sat in stunned silence. Journalists were frantically typing on their laptops. Investors were pulling out their phones, presumably calling their brokers. And Marcus stood frozen at the edge of the stage, his face drained of color, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. Emma advanced to the final slide, which showed a photo of her mother in the hospital during her final days. "Marcus Thornton destroyed my career when I was most vulnerable, when my mother was dying, and I had no resources to fight back. He believed that made him strong and me weak. He believed that power and money made him untouchable. He was wrong." She looked directly at Marcus, and her voice was cold as ice. "The evidence I have presented today has been provided to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agents are present in this room right now. Marcus Thornton, your crimes have been exposed. Your career is over, and you will face justice for everything you have done." On cue, the FBI agents moved through the crowd toward the stage. Marcus saw them coming and tried to run, but security personnel who had been briefed in advance blocked his exit. Within seconds, he was surrounded, handcuffed, and read his rights while cameras flashed and journalists shouted questions. Emma stood at the podium, watching as the man who had destroyed her was led away in handcuffs, and felt a wave of emotion so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. Relief, vindication, grief for the years she had lost, rage at the injustice she had endured, and beneath it all, a fierce, burning satisfaction. The audience erupted into chaos. TechVision's CEO was being swarmed by journalists and investors, demanding answers. Lawyers were huddling in urgent conversations. And Emma stood alone at the center of the storm, the invisible waitress who had just become the most visible person in the room. Layla appeared at her side, gently guiding her off the stage and back to the private room where Sheikh Rashid was waiting. The Sheikh stood as she entered, and for the first time since she had met him, his expression was something close to admiration. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "Absolutely magnificent." Emma sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "It's done. It's really done." "It is," Layla confirmed. "The FBI has Marcus in custody. The SEC is freezing TechVision's assets and launching a full investigation. And every major news outlet is covering the story. By tonight, Marcus Thornton will be the most infamous name in American business." Emma closed her eyes, letting the reality sink in. She had done it. She had exposed Marcus, reclaimed her algorithm, and ensured that he would face criminal prosecution. The invisible waitress had destroyed the powerful executive who had thought himself untouchable. But the victory felt hollow, incomplete. Because while Marcus would go to prison, while she would recover her intellectual property and her reputation, the years she had lost could never be recovered. Her mother would never know that her daughter had been vindicated. The pain and humiliation of the past 3 years would always be part of her story. Sheikh Rashid seemed to sense her thoughts. Justice is never perfect, Miss Carter. It cannot undo the past, but it can shape the future. And your future, I believe, will be extraordinary. Emma opened her eyes and looked at him. What happens now? Now, the Sheikh said, you decide who you want to become. You have your algorithm back. You have your reputation restored. You have job offers that will arrive within days from every major firm in the financial sector. You have power, Emma. The question is how you will use it. Emma thought about that for a long moment. Then she stood, straightened her suit, and met the Sheikh's gaze with steady determination. I want to use it to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. I want to build something that can't be stolen, that can't be destroyed by powerful men who think they're above the law. I want to create a company based on merit and integrity, not connections and corruption. Sheikh Rashid smiled. Then I believe we have much work to do together, Miss Carter. Welcome to the next chapter of your life. As Emma left the Javits Center that afternoon, surrounded by Layla and the legal team, she was swarmed by journalists shouting questions. She paused at the top of the steps, looked out at the cameras and microphones, and made a brief statement. My name is Emma Carter. 3 years ago, I was destroyed by a system that protects the powerful and punishes the vulnerable. Today, I fought back, and I won. To everyone who has been stolen from, betrayed, or silenced, your voice matters, your truth matters, and no one, no matter how rich or powerful, is untouchable. Thank you. She walked down the steps and into the waiting car, and as they drove away from the Javits Center, Emma looked back at the building one last time. Somewhere inside, Marcus Thornton was being processed, fingerprinted, and charged with crimes that would send him to prison for years. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His life as he knew it was finished. Emma had her justice. But more than that, she had her life back. And this time, no one would ever take it from her again. The aftermath of Marcus Thornton's exposure unfolded with the relentless momentum of an avalanche. Within hours of Emma's presentation, the story dominated every major news outlet. Financial networks ran continuous coverage, legal experts analyzed the evidence, and social media exploded with reactions ranging from outrage at corporate corruption to celebration of Emma's courage. Tech Vision Solutions' stock price collapsed, dropping 40% in a single day as investors fled and trading was temporarily halted. The company's board of directors held an emergency meeting and announced that Marcus had been terminated immediately, that they were cooperating fully with federal investigators, and that they were implementing comprehensive reforms to prevent future fraud. But the real story, the one that captured public imagination, was Emma herself. The narrative of a brilliant young woman destroyed by a powerful man, forced into invisibility, and then rising to expose his crimes resonated deeply. She became overnight a symbol of resistance against corporate corruption and a hero to everyone who had ever been betrayed by someone they trusted. Job offers arrived within 24 hours. Major investment firms, technology companies, and consulting groups all wanted to hire the woman who had taken down Marcus Thornton. But Emma declined them all. She had other plans. 2 weeks after the conference, Emma sat in Sheikh Rashid's penthouse suite at the Carlyle, reviewing documents that would change her life once again. The Sheikh had proposed a partnership. He would provide initial funding of $50 million for Emma to launch her own financial technology company, specializing in emerging markets analysis and ethical investment strategies. In exchange, he would receive a minority stake and a seat on the advisory board. The company would be called Carter Analytics, and it would be built on the principles that had been so conspicuously absent from her previous experiences in the financial sector: transparency, merit-based advancement, and zero tolerance for fraud or manipulation. This is more than a business opportunity. Miss Carter, Sheikh Rashid said as they reviewed the partnership agreement, this is a chance to build something that reflects your values. To prove that success and integrity are not mutually exclusive, Emma signed the documents, and as she did, she felt a sense of completion that had eluded her since the conference. The exposure of Marcus had been justice. This was redemption, but there was one more piece of unfinished business. 3 weeks after the conference, Emma received a call from the FBI agent who had arrested Marcus. He wanted to meet with her to discuss the upcoming trial. They met at a coffee shop in Lower Manhattan, and the agent, a man in his 40s named David Rodriguez, laid out the prosecution's case. "We have him cold," Agent Rodriguez said. "The evidence you provided is airtight. He's facing charges of securities fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. We're looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison." Minimum Emma absorbed this information with a mixture of satisfaction and something more complex. Not quite sympathy, but an awareness of the magnitude of what she had done. She had destroyed a man's life as thoroughly as he had destroyed hers. "There's something else," Agent Rodriguez continued. "Marcus wants to meet with you." Emma's head snapped up. "What?" "He's requested a meeting." "Through his lawyer. He says he wants to apologize." Emma's first instinct was to refuse, but curiosity won out. She wanted to see Marcus one more time, wanted to look into the eyes of the man who had destroyed her and see what remained after his own destruction. The meeting was arranged at the Federal Detention Center in Brooklyn, in a private room normally used for attorney-client conferences. Emma sat on one side of a table, and after a few minutes Marcus was led in by a guard. He wore an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him, and he looked like a shadow of the confident executive who had given the keynote address at the investor conference. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and when he sat down across from Emma, he seemed to have aged a decade in a matter of weeks. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. His voice, once so full of authority and condescension, was now barely above a whisper. Emma said nothing, simply waited. Marcus took a shaky breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to feel sorry for me. I needed to see you, to tell you that you were right, about everything." He looked down at his cuffed hands. "I told myself that what I did to you was just business, that I was teaching you how the world works, that the strong take from the weak, and that's just nature. But it wasn't nature, Emma. It was cruelty. It was theft. It was evil. And I destroyed you because I could, because it made me feel powerful, because I genuinely believed I was superior to you." His voice cracked. "My fiancé left me. My family won't speak to me. My lawyers tell me I'll be in prison until I'm in my 60s. Everything I built, everything I thought made me successful and important, it's all gone. And the worst part is that I deserve it. I deserve all of it." Emma watched him, this broken man who had once seemed so untouchable, and felt nothing, no satisfaction, no pity, just a cold, empty acknowledgement that justice had been served. "You're right," she said finally. "You do deserve it. You destroyed my career when my mother was dying. You stole years of my life. You made me invisible because you thought I didn't matter. And you would have done it to countless others if I hadn't stopped you." She leaned forward. "But here's what you need to understand, Marcus. I didn't destroy you for revenge. I destroyed you because you were a criminal, and you needed to be stopped. This isn't personal anymore. This is just consequences. You made choices, and now you're facing the results of those choices. That's not cruelty. That's justice." Marcus nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. I know. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." For whatever that's worth, Emma stood preparing to leave. "It's worth nothing," she said quietly, "but maybe it's a start toward you becoming a better person. Though that's not my concern anymore. You're not my concern anymore." She walked to the door, then paused and looked back. "Goodbye, Marcus. I hope you use your time in prison to figure out who you want to be when you get out. Because the person you were, that person deserved everything that happened to him." She left without waiting for a response, and as she walked out of the detention center into the bright afternoon sunlight, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The rage that had sustained her for 3 years, that had driven her to accept Sheikh Rashid's alliance and expose Marcus's crimes, was finally gone. In its place was something quieter but more powerful: peace. The following months were a whirlwind of activity. Carter Analytics launched with significant media attention, and Emma found herself in the unusual position of being a public figure. She gave interviews about corporate ethics, spoke at business schools about the importance of integrity, and became an advocate for stronger protections for whistleblowers and victims of intellectual property theft. Her algorithm, now properly credited and patented under her name, became the foundation of Carter Analytics' success. Within 6 months, the company had secured contracts with major investment firms and was being valued at over $200 million. Emma hired a team of brilliant analysts, many of them women and minorities who had faced discrimination in the financial sector, and built a company culture based on merit, transparency, and mutual respect. Sheikh Rashid, true to his word, had restructured his business operations to eliminate the fraudulent practices that had characterized his earlier career. He became a legitimate, if still formidable, player in international business, and his partnership with Emma proved mutually beneficial. She provided expertise in navigating American business culture and regulatory requirements. He provided capital, connections, and strategic guidance. But beyond the professional success, something unexpected had developed between Emma and the Sheikh. The alliance, born of pragmatism and mutual benefit, had evolved into something more complex. Respect, certainly, but also a genuine friendship and, gradually, something that neither of them had anticipated. It began with small moments, a conversation that extended beyond business into personal history, a shared meal where they discussed philosophy and values rather than strategy and profit, a moment of vulnerability when Sheikh Rashid spoke about the loneliness of power and the difficulty of trusting anyone when you're surrounded by people who want something from you. Emma understood that loneliness. She had been invisible for so long that even now, surrounded by success and recognition, she sometimes felt isolated. They were in many ways opposites. She had been powerless and was learning to wield power. He had always had power and was learning to use it responsibly. But they understood each other in a way that transcended their differences. 6 months after the launch of Carter Analytics, Sheikh Rashid invited Emma to dinner at a private restaurant in Manhattan, the kind of place that didn't advertise and only served clients who were personally known to the owner. They sat at a table overlooking the city, and for the first time in their relationship, the conversation wasn't about business. "You have accomplished something remarkable," Emma, the Sheikh said as they finished their meal. "You took your pain and transformed it into purpose. You took your destruction and rebuilt yourself into something stronger. That requires a kind of courage that most people never possess." Emma smiled. "I had help. You gave me the resources and support I needed to fight back. Without you, Marcus would still be free and I would still be serving tables." Perhaps, Sheikh Rashid acknowledged. "But I provided tools. You provided the will to use them. And in doing so, you changed me as well." Emma looked at him with surprise. "Changed you how?" The Sheikh was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I have spent my entire adult life believing that power was the only thing that mattered, that the strong take from the weak, and that morality is a luxury for people who can afford it. You showed me that I was wrong, not through lectures or judgment, but through example. You had every reason to become bitter and cruel, to use the power I gave you for pure revenge. But you didn't. You sought justice, not vengeance. You built something positive from your pain, and you made me question everything I believed about how the world works." He reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that was both intimate and tentative. "You made me want to be better, Emma, not for business reasons, not for strategic advantage, but because you made me see that there is more to life than accumulation and control. You made me see that integrity and power are not mutually exclusive. And you made me feel something I have not felt in many years: hope." Emma felt her heart begin to race. She had been so focused on rebuilding her career, on establishing Carter Analytics, on proving that she could succeed on her own terms, that she had not allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings that had been growing between them. "Rashid," she said softly, using his first name for the first time, "I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can trust someone with that kind of power over me again." "I understand," he said, "and I am not asking you to trust blindly. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that two people who have both been shaped by betrayal and loss might be able to build something together based on mutual respect and understanding. Not a relationship of power and submission, but a partnership of equals." Emma looked into his eyes and saw something she had never expected to see from Sheikh Rashid Al-Mansour: vulnerability. This man who commanded billions, who had once been willing to commit fraud for profit, who had seemed utterly untouchable, was offering her his heart and asking her to handle it carefully. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to know that this is real, not just gratitude or proximity or the intensity of everything we've been through together." "Take all the time you need," Rashid said. "I am not going anywhere. And whatever you decide, our partnership in business will continue. You have my word on that." They left the restaurant that night without resolution, but with an understanding that something had shifted between them, something that could not be ignored or dismissed. Over the following months, their relationship evolved slowly, carefully, with both of them navigating the complex dynamics of power, trust, and genuine affection. Rashid proved his sincerity through actions rather than words. He consulted Emma on major business decisions. He supported her advocacy work for corporate ethics reform, and he respected her boundaries without pressure or manipulation. And Emma gradually allowed herself to trust again. Not blindly, not naively, but with the hard-won wisdom of someone who had been destroyed and rebuilt. She learned that Rashid's arrogance had been a mask for deep insecurity, that his wealth had isolated him from genuine human connection, and that beneath the billionaire exterior was a man capable of growth, change, and love. 1 year after the Tech Vision Investor Conference, Carter Analytics celebrated its first anniversary with a company-wide event at a rooftop venue in Manhattan. Emma stood before her team, 50 brilliant analysts, developers, and support staff who had helped build something extraordinary, and reflected on how far she had come. "A year ago I was invisible," she said. "I served tables and pretended not to exist because I believed I had no other choice. But I learned something important. Invisibility is not safety. Silence is not peace. And accepting injustice does not make it hurt less." She looked around the room at faces that reflected the diversity and merit-based culture she had fought to create. "We built this company on the principle that talent and integrity matter more than connections and corruption. That success should be earned, not stolen. That power should be used to create opportunity, not to exploit vulnerability. And in 1 year we have proven that those principles are not naive idealism. They are good business." The room erupted in applause, and Emma felt a surge of pride and gratitude. This was what justice looked like. Not just the destruction of those who had wronged her, but the creation of something positive, something that would outlast the pain and provide opportunity for others. As the celebration continued, Rashid appeared at her side, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to her with a smile. "To Carter Analytics," he said, "and to the remarkable woman who built it." They touched glasses, and Emma felt the warmth of his presence beside her, solid and supportive. "I've made my decision," she said quietly, so only he could hear. Rashid's expression became serious. "And?" Emma turned to face him fully. "I'm ready. I'm ready to trust you. I'm ready to build something together, not just in business but in life. I'm ready to stop being afraid of vulnerability and start believing that not all powerful men are Marcus Thornton." Rashid set down his glass and took both of her hands in his. "Emma Carter, you are the strongest, most courageous person I have ever met, and I promise you that I will spend every day proving that your trust is not misplaced. Not because I am perfect, I am far from perfect, but because you have made me want to be worthy of you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a ring, not ostentatious or overwhelming, but elegant and meaningful, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light like stars. "I'm asking you to be my partner in every sense of the word, to build a life together based on respect, honesty, and love, to face the future as equals, supporting each other's dreams and challenging each other to be better. Will you marry me, Emma?" Emma looked at the ring, then at Rashid, then out at the Manhattan skyline glittering in the darkness. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, the destruction, the invisibility, the rage, the justice, and finally, the redemption. She thought about her mother, who would have been so proud to see her daughter not just surviving but thriving, and she thought about the future, full of possibility and promise. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Oh, yes, I will." As Rashid slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into an embrace, the room erupted in cheers. Emma's team had been watching, and they celebrated this moment as enthusiastically as they had celebrated the company's success. Emma stood in Rashid's arms, surrounded by people who respected her, in a company she had built, wearing a ring that symbolized a future she had chosen, and felt something she had not felt in years, complete. Unqualified happiness. The invisible waitress had become visible. The destroyed analyst had become a successful CEO. The victim had become a victor. And the woman who had lost everything had found not just justice but love, purpose, and a future worth fighting for. As the celebration continued into the night, Emma looked out at the city that had witnessed her destruction and her resurrection, and she smiled. The game was over. She had won. And the best part was that this victory wasn't about defeating someone else. It was about becoming herself, fully and unapologetically. Marcus Thornton was in prison, serving a 20-year sentence. Tech Vision Solutions had been restructured and was slowly rebuilding under new leadership. The financial sector had implemented new protections for whistleblowers and victims of intellectual property theft, partly because of Emma's advocacy, but more importantly, Emma Carter had reclaimed her life, her voice and her power. She had proven that justice was possible, that integrity could coexist with success, and that the strong did not have to take from the weak. They could lift them up instead. And as she stood on that rooftop in Manhattan, surrounded by love and success and possibility, Emma finally let go of the last remnants of pain and anger that had defined her for so long. She was no longer the woman Marcus had destroyed. She was no longer the invisible waitress. She was Emma Carter, CEO, advocate, partner, and survivor. She was visible. She was powerful. She was free. And her story, which had begun with betrayal and destruction, ended with justice, love, and the promise of a future built on her own terms. The Sheikh Billionaire had ordered her silence, and she had replied in Arabic, revealing his billion-dollar betrayal. But more than that, she had revealed her own strength, her own worth, and her own unbreakable spirit. The end was really just the beginning, and Emma Carter was ready for whatever came next.